Good afternoon and welcome to another Mtech Access Words of Wisdom webinar. I'm Tom Clarke and we're back to talk about everything that's going on in the NHS at the moment. We've got a fantastic speaker this afternoon to talk about really prominent issues in the NHS and health and social care more widely, to give us another fresh perspective on the whole health and social care archipelago, which isn't a word I use often. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Jon Siddall, who is the Chief Executive of the South West Academic Health Science Network. Jon previously worked at Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital Charity, leading programmes to address urban health challenges in inequity. Prior to Guy's and Tommy's, Jon worked across a range of health and social care issues, working with funders, investors and government agencies in the UK, Ireland and New Zealand, including a previous stint at the AHSN. Jon's also held a range of non-exec roles, including seats on the advisory boards of the NHS Innovation Accelerator, SBRI Healthcare, the Health Innovation Network, and the UK Task Force on Multiple Conditions. He's also raced up from Cornwall to be with us today, so yeah, hopefully the A30 isn't a trail of destruction behind you. But thank you so much, Jon, for joining us today. So take a second to catch your breath. Yeah, welcome. Can't wait to speak with you. If you could start, really, I suppose, just by giving yourself a little bit of an introduction and a bit of an introduction to your organisation as well.
Yeah, sure, very happy to, and thanks for having me on today. It's really great to have the opportunity to chat with you and others that are listening as well. Yeah, as you said, I literally arrived 30 seconds ago from Cornwall, which I guess is demonstration of some of the challenges of working in our patch, right, which is a good 4 or 5 hours from one end of it to the other. So yeah, we're back out and about again. So it means we're getting used to life with lots of traffic on the road in our part of the world as well. But it's great to be here. So I think you've given me a pretty comprehensive introduction there already, Tom. So I'll perhaps just pull out a few things that I wanted to mention. So as you said, I'm the Chief Executive of the South West Academic Health Science Network, and we're one of 15 AHSNs, as I'm sure you and your members and people that work with you are aware. And I guess in summary, what we exist to do as academic health science networks is to transform the lives of people across England, across the country that we work in. But by doing that through health and care innovation, how we really bring new health and care innovation to market in the NHS to have a dual benefit, really. One is about having a benefit to the population that live here and helping people live healthier lives through more effective health and care services. But a big part of it is how we work with commercial companies and the wider health and life science system to generate economic growth as well. And that's really at the heart of the dual aim of all AHSNs, is both generating wealth and generating economic growth, whilst also trying to improve population health and doing those two things at once. So as you mentioned, I joined South West AHSN back in April last year, so right early on in the days of the pandemic, just starting to hit all parts of the country and down here as well. And I joined from Guy's and St Thomas's Foundation, as you described, and I'm really fortunate to have a really interesting role there, where I was asked to help design and launch the charity's new work on urban health, and that's now turned into Impact on Urban Health, which is a long-term commitment by one of the UK's biggest charitable foundations to looking at how we improve the health of living in cities all around the world. So it's been a great experience working in inner city London, doing that, working with other cities around the world. And I'm now really grateful to be back here in the Southwest, I guess bringing some of the knowledge of that work there and some of the work I've done before to the things that I'm really passionate about. And maybe I'll finish on kind of the intro, Tom, by saying I think broadly in my career, I think there's been two things I've been particularly interested in, particularly for the last 10 years or so. And the first of those is this kind of age-old challenge that we've had across healthcare generally, but I think particularly in the NHS, around how do we take things that we know work and get them into practice faster and make sure they benefit the population as fast as we possibly can. And that's something I've been particularly interested in, that kind of wicked problem that I think we've had for many years, that we still have, and we're doing lots to improve it, but still a big challenge for us. And then my work in Guy's really kind of shone the light for me on something that the pandemic has really highlighted. I think that's something that's always been there, but it's something I've been particularly passionate about for I guess 10 years or so now, which is how we deal with some of the real inequities of health, but particularly through the lens of improvement and innovation as well. And that's why I'm so excited about the work I get to do now, which is bringing those two things together. So this I guess passion and interest I have for how to create more equitable health for everyone to have a healthier life, but how do we do that in a way of thinking about the role of taking things that could have real benefit to the health and care system, whether that's new technologies, new pharmaceutical products, new service improvement models, new ways of delivering care, but target those specifically to the ways that we improve health equity across the country. So yeah, I feel very fortunate now to be leading an organisation that's trying to do both those things. So I'll leave it there. Happy to add a bit more if that's helpful.
Yeah, fantastic, thank you. And I think we'll get stuck into some of those areas as we go. It sounds like you've written your own job description in some respects, doesn't it? So that's great to hear. I mean, over the years, I've done work with the AHSNs, and I think a lot of our audience will have encountered them in one guise or another. And in the, is it 7 or 8 years now since they were first sort of put on the table, obviously there's been a lot of change going on, and well, some of us might know that some AHSNs, you know, have different focuses from others, and there's a whole load of national stuff as well. Could you expand a bit more on your remit as an AHSN, as the network, and sort of what the day-to-day looks like?
Yeah, very, very happy to. So I don't know whether you mentioned, I think in the introduction, Tom, I've been involved in and around academic health science networks since very early on. So I helped to set up the Southwest one that I now work in almost 7 or 8 years ago now. Right in the early stages of innovation, health and wealth, and that whole policy direction, which was trying to tackle that issue of how do we accelerate innovation across the health and care system? How do we do that to improve population health and generate economic growth? And you know, those dual aims and that overarching purpose of why AHSNs were setting up, I think is as important now as it was 7 or 8 years ago. And I think what we've seen over that period is, you know, a maturity in AHSNs in understanding what it takes to do that, trying different ways to do it, recognizing that context matters, and how we do that in the Southwest is going to be different to how you do it in South London. I sat on the board of South London AHSN for a few years when I was working up there as well, so kind of got to see this challenge from a different perspective. But the overarching challenge, which is how do we take the things that we think have real promise, or do we think they're going to have real benefit to the population, to our health and care system, and to the companies that we work with, and the life science industries that we work within, to put that into practice at scale, have an impact at scale. And I think that issue, that challenge, and that overarching purpose is as important now as it was 7 or 8 years ago. I think what's changed is we've perhaps built a clearer sense of what it takes to do that, and where AHSN specifically can add value. And I've worked very closely with all of the 15 or 14 other chief officers of the AHSNs over the last year, where we've been looking quite deeply at what does our future look like in terms of the impact we can have? How could we grow the impact we have? How could we really make sure we're focusing on the things where we uniquely add value as academic health science networks working together at a national level? And what we heard through that process of thinking about that, talking to our stakeholders, our commissioners, the people we work with, is that challenge of identifying things that are of value, helping the health and care system then adopt those at scale so they have impact both on population health and economic growth, is exactly the area where I think AHSNs have a unique capability that we've developed over the last 7 or 8 years that perhaps other parts of the system really struggle with. So that's the role as a national network that we're really committed to focusing on. And we do that in a few different ways. So at a regional level, I think we've all developed different types of deep relationships with the integrated care systems that are forming in our region and the providers and commissioners that we work with. And that then enables us to do a combination of two things, really. So firstly, it enables us to work deeply in a region to identify and test and develop things that are really valuable to our region, whether that's new technologies, new service models, new ways of improving patient safety, and then look at bringing that together with a much more nationally coordinated way of working as a system of AHSNs. And that, as you mentioned in your introduction, that's the balance of the work that we now do, is both deep within our regions, and we really can't do the work we do at a national scale without the depth of relationships, without the depth of understanding of the places that we work. But the power now is connecting that at a national level to work on a small number of things that we really want to try and achieve at a national level as well. So our portfolio of work now as a national network of AHSNs consists of both a set of national programs, so that includes our work with the Accelerated Access Collaborative and working around rapid uptake products, and our national programs around things like ADHD diagnostics, around eating disorders and patient safety. But it also includes in the regional work we do, where we're trying to get deeper into the specific issues of our regions and develop potentially new national programs for the future as well. So I think that combined focus of both depth of regional work and understanding, combined with adopting and spreading nationally relevant, impactful innovations at the same time, is where AHSNs are most valued. And I guess the final thing I'd add to that in terms of how the evolution has grown and the importance of that national coordination that we now have is that none of that would be possible if we didn't have the breadth of commissioning relationships that we do. So we have a number of commissioning relationships across all AHSNs, and that includes our work with the Office of Life Sciences, which is where our world with health and life science systems really kind of is most significant. That helps us to build a pipeline and understanding of all the innovations that are coming into market that have the potential for value for the health and care system. But if we didn't have those deep regional and local relationships, we wouldn't be able to then really do that matching of what is really meaningful to the systems that we work with, what will it take to actually put these things into practice, and bring that together with things that are nationally relevant or achieve impact at a national scale as well. I think, final thing I'd say is I'm really proud of what AHSN has achieved, and largely why I came back to AHSN is I think there's been huge growth and development of how we do that. And you look at some of the things we've achieved over the last few years, the work that we've done has benefited nearly 250,000 patients over the last year alone. And our combined economic impact over the last 3 years is nearly £1 billion worth of inward investment leveraged, and nearly 3,000 jobs created or safeguarded over the last few years as well. So that dual aim of reaching patients, having an impact, but also having an impact on economic growth, I think is really starting to be demonstrated at scale now, and in practice as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic to hear, because I think over the years, the AHSNs have maybe not been seen equally around the country, but it really shows that there is that maturity and that network coming together to deliver the national stuff, and things like £1 billion of funding. You can't ignore things like that. So it's fantastic to hear about how it's all coming together. In terms of your priorities locally, what is it that you're doing that's maybe specific to the Southwest?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So look, all AHSNs have that common purpose that we described. So that's the same for us. So that purpose around identifying and then helping to spread innovation that has value to the health and care system, to the populations we work with, is what we exist to do. So we're no different from any other AHSN from that perspective. I think what we've tried to do in the Southwest then is say that we think we can achieve greater impact through our work regionally if we have a bit more focus to the work that we do. And that's not to say that some issues are more important than others, because frankly, there are lots of really important issues to all health and care systems we work with. But we think working as a national network, there's a real opportunity for some of us to specialise deeper in specific areas to then build a pipeline of innovation that has then value and potential at a national level as well. So we've taken a very deliberate decision to do that, to be a bit more focused in the work we do. And I've spent the last year or so, or 6 months or so, working with our members and the partners that we work with across the area that we cover, so Somerset, Devon and Cornwall, so just over 2 million people, to say what would be the area that we could really focus on, what theme would really resonate with the needs of our population, I guess is the first thing, and the sense of where we can help. So let's take on an issue where an AHSN can be useful, not something that perhaps lots of other people are working on, or is not something that we necessarily can do anything about. And then finally, let's go with where the energy and assets are in the region that we can build on and do more of. So that those combined filters, I guess, of saying how do we think about the needs of the region, the nature of the place and the people that we work with, and where we can go deeper into particular issues, and also then think about what could be nationally relevant. So the work that we do here is not only going to be beneficial to the people that live across the Southwest, but also hopefully is nationally relevant for those future national programs that we can bring to bear as well. So we worked through a bit of a process over that, looking at those different variables, I guess, to say those are the things that should influence where we focus. And where we've ended up focusing our efforts then is on trying to see if we can improve health equity in our region, but do that through what an AHSN is really good at, which is identifying innovation and putting that into practice at scale. And that's been an important filter to the prioritization of where we're focusing, is of course on the needs of the system and where we're working, but can we find good pipeline of innovation, good evidence base which we could bring to bear that's currently not in place in our region, and see if we can have an impact through that. So that's where we've decided to focus our efforts, is around improving health equity through innovation, so through the work that we do as an AHSN. And our plan is to do that by focusing down on a handful of specific health equity gaps, so where we see significant variation in outcomes for the population that live in our region. And those gaps are typically around access to service, might be gaps in quality of care, It might be gaps in individuals' opportunity for a healthy life that they have in the place where we work across Somerset, Devon and Cornwall. So that's the approach we've taken. I can go into a bit more detail if that's helpful on the sorts of issues we're starting to look at, but we've taken that decision for the next 5 years to have a really thematic focus on health equity and really bring that focus to both the regional work that we develop, but I hope also in the way that we deliver some of the national programs that we work on as well, and already having great conversations with the new Health Inequalities team and Bola's team in NHS England, who are looking at this, of course, across all parts of the way health and care is delivered and the way we improve population health as well.
Yeah, no, that's really useful to get that oversight. I mean, I suppose in our audience, a lot of colleagues from both the NHS and more so from industry, and probably a lot of them would say, well, everything we do is, you know, can support improvements in health inequities one way or another. So in terms of your challenges that you're looking at, you said you can expand a bit on some of those, and how do you decide what makes it and what doesn't, I suppose?
Yeah. Well, it's a difficult question. I think it's a question that, you know, all parts of the NHS struggle with, is where do you put your energy, right? Because there's lots of really important issues that matter to lots of different parts of our population, different types of clinical disease areas, different population groups, different geographies of the patch that we work in. So the approach that we work through is to say, well, let's use the sort of analysis that we use to try and inform how we define a thematic focus down at a programmatic level around specific issues. So we did a fairly significant piece of work earlier on in this year to say, what does the data tell us about where inequity is greatest in terms of our health and care system? And of course, that will be only as good as the data that we've got. But actually, our data on health inequalities is pretty good. There's been a huge effort over many years from agencies like Public Health England and others to really understand the nature of health inequalities in places. So we've looked at the data. We've then looked at, okay, what does that really mean then for the way in which clinical teams are experiencing inequity in our region as well, and engaging with clinicians across our patch to understand their perspective on inequities, and then bring that together then with a sense of what's the innovation pipeline and evidence base that we could bring to bear on some of those issues. So where we ended up with was firstly, I think, a really good macro level understanding through working in partnership with colleagues in local authorities, in commissioning organisations, and in some of our provider trusts to say, look, broadly, we think there's about 10 or 12 big health equity issues for a place like the Southwest. And that's a place that I think is different to other areas, but draws some similarities as well. And having worked in inequalities in inner city London, which is clearly a really different population, different geography to the one we work in, there are some real differences and some real similarities as well. And I think we often characterise the Southwest about being about older people, about frailty, about rurality. But the reality is those things are absolutely all true, but there's other things going on as well. So we have a population where there is real pockets of urban inequity as well as rural as well. Both of those play out in different ways. Rural perhaps being more to do or linked to issues of access, whereas urban perhaps linked to elements of the underlying opportunity for a healthy life when you live in a certain type of environment, a certain context. So that sense of, I guess, complexity to the inequality is something that we've started to get into in a fair bit of detail. We've also then to start to look at actually how the assumptions around where some of the challenges are play out in the data. So I guess a good example of that I often refer to is the fact that if you live in the Southwest, what the data suggests to us that if you're a child living in the Southwest, you're nearly 3 times more likely to live in one of the lowest socioeconomic groups than you are if you're an older person. Yet a lot of the pressure that we perceive in the health and care system at the sharp end is about older people and frailty. So how do we think about the balancing of that and looking at some of the inequities of health that are perhaps masked by some of the immediate pressure, to think about how we get under the surface of that and look at some of the issues, particularly around young people as well. And then when you look at some of those issues, so let's take the issue around things like children and young people's mental health, which is one of the issues we're looking at, you realise that it's not a universal challenge for every part of the Southwest. It's specific pockets where we need to build a deep understanding of actually what is going on in those populations and what can we do about it. So that's I guess that kind of macro level view that we've started to develop by looking at the data, speaking to clinical teams working on this, starting to engage with patients and populations that are experiencing some of those inequities as well. So to answer your question, we got down to about 12 big health equity gaps that we've identified in our region. And then we've been working with our members and partners to prioritise which ones of those should we start on. And I have a very clear view that we do a few, and we try and really get deep into some specific issues, because you're absolutely right. There are inequalities across the health and care system that need to be worked on, whether that's around access to care, quality, or individuals' agency and opportunity for a healthy life. But we need to get specific about the things we should work on. So the two that we've started working on already, one is on perinatal care, so looking at that perinatal period of during pregnancy and just after, and looking at the quite significant inequities of outcomes for people through that part of the life cycle of someone's health. And we've also started looking at young people's mental health as well, and that's an issue that I think is a challenge, as I've mentioned, links to some of the elements of how deprivation plays out in a place like ours. But it's also something that's, I think, particularly relevant right now after 18 months of a pandemic and some of the challenges facing young people across the country as well. So those are a couple of the issues we've started to look at. What we're now trying to do is look at what's the innovation pipeline look like for issues like that we can start testing, bringing into practice faster, to then evaluate and build an evidence base for hopefully working out how we might use innovative new practice to try and tackle some of those issues.
Fantastic. It sounds like a fascinating approach, and I can really understand the complexity that you talked about there, that things aren't just as they seem. And we've probably all got that stereotype of the Southwest, and probably got similar stereotypes for each of the 15 sort of AHSN areas. So you mentioned the data there. So obviously there's huge volumes of data out there around health and social care. Typically it's not very joined up. So how do you go about that process of gathering the data? Which data sets are you looking at, and how do you arrive at bringing all this stuff together to make informed decisions?
Yeah. So I guess the first thing to say is I'm definitely not the expert when it comes to how do we bring the data together and analyze it. I'm lucky to have great people across the team that have been doing some really good work in this area. But actually, largely, it's about working with data that exists and some really smart people that have been looking at this stuff for quite a while. So the sorts of health inequalities that we're trying to get into and trying to do something about, I don't think we're discovering those. I don't think COVID has created those. These are long-standing challenges for the way we think about population health across the country, and certainly the work I did in London really demonstrated that to me over the last few years. So what we've tried to do is draw on all the people that have got expertise in this already and try and help them to help us, rather than trying to create our own sources of data or sources of analysing that data as well. So in practice, we've drawn on mostly publicly available data sets, so the public health profiles data that PHE produce. And we've drawn on data from Health Foundation and Nuffield and others that have been looking at some of these issues, particularly during the pandemic, how we've seen health inequalities exacerbated or played out in particular populations and particular groups. And we're fortunate to have some great public health teams that we've been drawing on their experience of their data. They know their populations. They've been working in their areas, in their populations for many years at a much deeper level than we have. So we're not trying to replicate that, we're trying to draw on that data. And then I think the bit that we're trying to do is then let's do something with it, and then let's put it into practice with trying to do something that we're, I think, good at doing, which is trying to find some really great new ways of practice, new types of innovation, then bring that into those issues to see if we can have an impact on them in practice. So I guess to answer your question, it's largely about drawing on the data of others and drawing on existing publicly available data. But I guess what we're trying to do is layer up some of that to look at what does it mean when you start to place them together. So what happens when you start to look at broad health inequality data alongside some of the data we're looking around perinatal outcomes, and then you start to see some overlaps with, well, actually there's a significant correlation between the areas where you've got particularly younger females who have higher weight, so more likelihood of obesity, combined with some of the inequities of perinatal outcomes during that period as well. So is there something there that we should be looking at around the health of young mums going into pregnancy, and how we could work around some of those particular types of areas? So that is just purely a hypothesis based on data, and clearly the next stage then is to say, okay, well, let's go and really find out what's going on. Let's work with the clinical teams. Let's work with people who are in reality experiencing some of the inequalities of health that we see in the place where we work, and work with them to try and look at how we might help support them to lead healthier lives going through those key transition points in life. like pregnancy and that perinatal period in people's lives. So that's I guess ultimate approach. Take the publicly available data, bring that together with existing local knowledge, engage some of the clinical teams we work with to really more deeply understand the nature of the issues, and start to form some hypothesis around how we could do something to help. And then start to marry that up with, okay, what do we know is taking place across the AHSN network around perinatal care, which we could either adapt and pivot to try and tackle particular health equity issues, or perhaps as innovators out there have a particular passion about working with some of the populations that we think we will need to in order to have an impact on that issue. So I guess in summary, it's really about working with the available data, but perhaps using it in a different way, in a much more targeted way, which I think is what really getting at inequalities is really all about.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, and it sounds like, and I know stuff that you're doing in the Southwest, you really are strong on kind of that partnership element, and it's quite clear that you found your role in the system, and you're talking there about bringing stuff together that's already out there, and probably people have been looking at this data in isolation, thinking, okay, well, what does this mean? How do we do it? But then when you bring together the hospital data, the public health data, the primary care data, then suddenly you've got that picture of that, young lady who's just become pregnant, whatever, and you can understand a lot more about them. So I think it's fantastic to hear that approach is working, because it's kind of core to, I suppose, a lot of the integration agenda, and fundamentally you need to sort of have that catalyst to be able to bring things together. In terms of then how you feed it back out, so how you are working in partnership with your health and social care partners, what are you doing kind of with them, as it were, to actually help them sort of take up new technologies, embed better practice, undertake sort of quality improvement work?
Well, I get on the particular area of some of the health inequalities that we've started to work on, very early days. So we started working on this around April, May time, after doing the kind of early analysis piece that I talked about. We're now in a stage of really engaging to understand, and I guess one of the underlying philosophies we have as an AHSN is that importance of understanding the problem that we're trying to address is absolutely critical to then being able to do something about it. I know that sounds like common sense, but I don't think it's something we always do. I think often are quick to jump to the solution without deeply understanding the nature of the problem that we're trying to tackle. So we're trying to do that really well at the moment. And then I guess what we're trying to do is really draw on our experience of the last 7 years, but particularly last few years, where we've been working in partnership with our local systems to help them identify things that are of real value and help them put them into practice at scale. And to be honest, that's a combination of both, I guess, a medical and a behavioural science or a social science, in the sense that I think achieving that kind of sense of awareness, understanding, and adoption of new technologies, new techniques, new ways of working is of course about the evidence base, and but everything we do is grounded in innovation that we are confident there is a strong evidence base behind it. But it's also married to the fact that the process of change is about people understanding the nature of why something is of value, how it could apply to them, thinking about the context of the particular hospital or GP practice or part of the community system that they might work in, and thinking about how we might apply it in practice. So we've worked really closely with an organisation called the Billions Institute over the last few years, where we've worked with them to learn from their work in the US about large-scale change. How do you achieve spread and adoption of new things through large-scale change? And how do you build the conditions for that in the places where we work? And broadly speaking, we do that in 3 different ways. The first is the way that you're probably most familiar with, which is we take things that we know work, either from our national programs or in the past through our regional work, and we help our health and care systems to understand the value of those, think about the application in practice, and practical support then to put those things into practice. And that's about bringing together both an understanding of the evidence, but the practical support to understand the context, because implementing something in one GP practice or one hospital is not necessarily the same as implementing it in another. And as much as we'd like to just be able to press a button and say, let's get that thing done everywhere, we all know that's not how the NHS works, because of the nature of how it's evolved over many, many years. So not necessarily deliberate, but that is the nature of where we are. So those practical programs where we roll our sleeves up, we get involved working with our providers and partners across the 3 counties that we work in, the 3 systems that we work in, and help them do that practically. The second thing we've realized, and that's where I mentioned the partnership with Billions, is that we're only going to do that if we help the partners we work with build their capability as organizations to be innovative, to be able to improve, and to be able to adopt those things in practice and at scale in the organizations that we work with. So a big part of the work we do is about working with those partners to help them to build their capability to do that. So some of that's through things like quality improvement training and building an awareness and understanding of how do you do rapid scale testing of change and understand the value of that and understand how and why something may or may not have worked. But it's also about building the culture and capability for absorbing new things as well, and recognizing how we think about that in the context of our own individual organizations interacting with others as well. So I think there's a large part of a kind of culture and skills based piece of work that we do around our second area of capability building. And then the third area of our work, which I think is also particularly important when you're bringing together the kind of nature of it being both in building the evidence base around the science of the change that we're trying to bring about, whether that's a new piece of technology or a new service model, is the work that we do around evaluation and learning. So that's about helping the partners that we work with test out stuff in practice, validate whether or not it actually works in the way the evidence suggests it works in practice in their context, but really critically understand how it needs to work in practice to continue to be sustained or scaled in other places as well. So that sense of real world validation and real world evaluation, which is not at the sharp end of kind of academic research, is absolutely at the practical end of really trying stuff out, seeing if it works, understanding whether or not it works, and then building that into a learning cycle of doing more of that. And that obviously clearly links with building the capability in organizations to learn and develop and innovate as well. So I guess in summary, it's those two things together of building capability in the evaluation of how we build the culture capability in organizations for them to be better at this, and then providing them some really practical support to say, look, here's some great stuff. Let's see if we can help you put this into practice and have an impact in the organizations that you're running, in the places where you're working.
Yeah, it's really interesting, that area, because I'm probably not being too unfair. I might be in sort of characterizing that the NHS historically has kind of looked at, here's the clinical evidence, do it, and it's kind of been that top down, go out and do this. So those two elements that you described there about sort of developing the capabilities and the learning, how are your partners in health and social care responding to that? Is that an approach that they're comfortable with, that they want to take? Do they see the benefit? Do you see the results of it?
Yeah, well, I think so I'm really pleasantly surprised coming back down to the Southwest, just how much energy there is to try and improve what we do here. And I felt this last time I worked in the Southwest a few years back, and it's hard to put your finger on why, but I think there is a real sense of wanting to work better together to improve the care that we provide across the whole health and care system. So I think we're working in a place that has a real appetite for doing it. I think what we often assume, though, is that, you know, if you combine that appetite with a bit of evidence, then someone's going to go, hey, that's the thing we should do, let's crack on. And the reality is that the context of implementing something new, of implementing change, is both A, more complex, and B, quite context specific to that individual place that you're working in, whether that individual practice or that individual hospital, or individual ward, or particular department you might be working in. That it's really about understanding the nature of the context in which you're trying to implement that change that leads to either it being successful or not. So I think what we really try and do is, rather than saying, hey, we've got this shiny new thing, why don't we all use it, is to say, what is the work you're doing on this particular area? So let's take, for example, Tom, the work we're doing around ADHD, for example, as part of our national program. Now, we are looking at a very particular part of the pathway, which is about diagnosis of ADHD, but we're not just going to be able to talk just about that bit. So the way in which we start the conversations with the systems that we work with is to say, what's going on in your patch at the moment, in your system, around people with ADHD, or people who are potentially to be diagnosed with ADHD? What are the challenges around the pathways in which you're trying to support and provide care to people for that particular issue? And how can we look at improving that together? And this is a potential way that we could forge as part of that. So we tend to look at the pathway change that's required and then looking at the context of the specific innovation that we know has built an evidence base around it, and then look at the right application of that particular innovation, that particular change that we're trying to bring about in the context of the pathway. And I think what often, I think clinical teams across the country probably experience is people firing point solutions at them, when what they really need is an understanding of where that point solution could fit into the context of the world that they work in and particular pathways and population patient groups that they are trying to support and try and improve the care of. And that sense of, I guess, orientation within a particular context is often at the heart, I think, of what makes a difference between the way an AHSN might approach thinking about the adoption of something new versus perhaps how we might have traditionally approached it, which is, well, we've told everyone they should be doing it, why aren't they doing it? And of course that would be great if that worked, but the reality is that the bringing about the process of change to achieve that is more complex than just pressing a button and saying let's do it.
Yeah. Do you think there's such a thing as a quick win then, Jon?
Well, I think, one thing that COVID's demonstrated to us is there is, in that when you have a really clear sense of what matters right now, you've got a system that's motivated to really try and tackle that, and you've got both national and local policy that's aligned to try and deliver that in practice. We saw some really rapid scale change at huge scale as well. So if you think about the adoption and use of virtual consultation in the early stages of the pandemic, which we did a lot of work on, we went from pretty low take-up rates and utilization of virtual consultation to it being up in kind of 90% range. Now there was a particular set of context that allowed for that, but I guess what that shows is it is possible, but that is in a context of a single issue that we're trying to do at a particular point in time where all the stars were aligned to do that thing.
Yeah.
But I think what that does give me some sense of, I guess, belief in the strategy that we're taking in the Southwest is to say that I think focus really matters, that there are many competing priorities across the health and care system, and of course the NHS needs to look at those systematically and think about all the range of different things it needs to work on. But I think agencies like ours that are working within the healthcare system but not necessarily part of NHS care provision, we have a real opportunity to try and accelerate particular areas of care through a much more focused approach. And I think we're increasingly trying to do that as a network of AHSNs, of how we put our collective weight behind particular areas. And the work we're doing with the AAC and about things like rapid uptake products, I think is already starting to show the benefit of that. And I think there's more to come that will demonstrate that as well. So I don't think there's a quick win in that there's an easy way of taking the thing that you've got and getting everyone to use it. But is there a quick win in the way that we work as a system in a more coherent and focused way to do things? I think we can do more of that. But it's tough, right? Like the NHS faces many different types of challenges, many different types of priorities that we should be working on. So it's easy for me to kind of, I guess, philosophize around the fact that we should be more focused when we all know there's lots of things to focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, we both work in a similar sort of space between the NHS and industry and sort of bringing people together. Every day I'm having conversations with people around the industry who have great things which can all make a difference, and we talked a bit about prioritisation. What do you see as the role of healthcare industries in helping sort of health and social care move forward?
Well, I think, I almost think kind of asking about the specific role of specific parts is almost kind of asking the wrong question, because it feels like, to me, what we really all need to do is get focused on the things that really matter right now to how we improve health, and then work out who we need to be working with to do that. And absolutely, that industry has to be not just at the table, but a critical part of that, in the same way I think the community sector needs to be a critical part of that, and local authorities need to be part of that as well. And I think often it's about, I guess, really starting with the problem that we're collectively trying to solve together. So bring some focus to what we're doing, and then think about the respective capabilities and assets that we can bring to bear on that particular issue. So if I kind of draw some parallels to some of my work when I was with Guys, we look really carefully about how do we think much more broadly, I guess, at the role of different sectors in tackling particular types of health and care problems. So it's not necessarily just about bringing new things to tackle existing problems. Sometimes it can be about the pivoting of existing things to tackle an existing problem in a different way. I think if you look at the sorts of issues we're going to be working on over the next few years regionally, so things like perinatal care, things like children and young people's mental health, I don't think we're out there looking for health inequality innovations. I think we'll be communicating clearly to the different parts of the system that we work with that we think this is the nature of the challenge that we're facing. So let's take, for example, we think there's an ongoing challenge around how do we tackle particular types of population groups and help them to reduce the rates of smoking during pregnancy of those particular populations, like as a particular example. What could we do to work differently with those sorts of populations with some of the existing technology or innovation that we have, rather than saying we need a new thing to fix this problem? And I think that's probably in the work that we'll be doing around inequalities and equity, is about saying how do we really understand the problem together and then understand it from the perspective of the individuals which are experiencing that problem, and then see if we can work together to do something about it. And my hunch, and I have to say it's nothing more than that at this stage, is a lot of what we will do will be working with industry partners, working with the community sector, working with the NHS to pivot and adjust the way in which we have perhaps done things before, or we've tried things before, but with a deeper understanding of the nature of the issue that we're tackling. So we've often tackled those issues at a universal population level, rather at a more granular level. Actually, it's about this particular part of Plymouth, this particular group of people that are really struggling during pregnancy, and how can we work with them in a different way and provide the sorts of care that we know will improve the outcomes for them during that perinatal period in a different way as well. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is it's about having a collective sense of purpose, a collective sense and understanding of the problem, which I ultimately think comes from speaking to the people experiencing that problem and the teams working with those groups of people across the place where we work, and then using that as a basis of thinking about how we bring together a set of changes in order to have an impact on that particular issue. And the final thing I'd say on it is, I think it's also recognizing that in many of these sorts of challenges, particularly once you get into some of the challenges around inequality, are not going to be solved by kind of one thing that's going to make all the difference. It's much more likely to be a combination of things. So it's about that sense of working together on a combination of things to try and make an improvement. And I guess for industry, that's about really being collaborative in the nature of how they might work with other parts of industry, how they might work with different parts of a system in a particular place, with a real attention to the particular issue that you're focusing on.
Yeah, okay, and I think you've given quite a clear brief there, but I'm just going to get into the nuance of it a little bit more. So I'm sort of hearing that you're saying companies or industry needs to have a bit of a listening brief and listen to what's happening in the Southwest, and then think about where they can fit into those bits. So are you looking for people to think sort of creatively about how they fit your puzzle, or is there still a place for, you know, a transformative technology of some sort, be that device, digital, medicine, whatever it is, where people will come along and say, you know, you're not looking at whatever it might be, you know, dermatology at the moment, but this thing is going to make such a difference that it needs to be on your radar?
Yeah, so like absolutely is probably the answer. So that the short answer to that question, but maybe to be a bit, you know, to open it up and be a bit more specific. What I've described in a lot of our conversation today is a belief that by being more focused as an AHSN, we'll have a bigger population health impact, we'll generate more economic growth because we'll build deep expertise in particular issues and hopefully have a real impact on those. I should emphasize that that's a strategy and a hypothesis, and I can't demonstrate it to you yet, but that's the intention of what we're trying to do here. And I really believe that will have an impact. But we also have a whole range of nationally commissioned activity that we're responsible within that brief as well. So we've talked a lot about some of the national programs that we have and how we work as a national network of AHSNs, but we're also commissioned by the Office of Life Science to be that front door to innovators through the work we do through our innovation exchange and the way that we're trying to think about being both the I guess, that front door to having conversations with industry, understanding the nature of their proposition, understanding the maturity of the evidence base they've built behind it, and providing advice, guidance, testing, validation as part of the work we do. So we absolutely do that as a national network. We have a small team that does some of that in the Southwest as well. I think what we've increasingly trying to do in our partnership with the AAC is to say, look, we need to do that really well together in a really coordinated way, because the innovator that's approaching 15 different AHSNs is coming with the same products, not with 15 different products. So how do we understand that in a coordinated way at a national level, and start to look at where there is real energy or need for a particular type of innovation, where we might start to be able to do that testing and validation process as well. So a lot of the work we do in the Southwest is searching for that matching process of companies with great products, great ideas that have the potential for tackling an issue that we know our region is particularly interested in. And we're going to have this real emphasis on health equity issues, but equally we'll continue to do the work we do as an AHSN in connecting industry to the clinical teams we work with, to the local health and care systems that we work with, to try and look for those opportunities to test and validate products in practice as well. And that's, as well as being that front door, I think increasingly where we're adding significant value to those organizations and the sort of commercial companies that we work with is helping to make the connections and then test and validate and evaluate in practice. And that's about that sense of like real world validation, which then starts to build not just the underlying, I guess, research and evidence base, but actually the practical application and value, and also helps understand the company and other systems that then might want to adopt that. Like, what does it take to do this? How do you do it? And I think that's the real emphasis on where AHSNs kind of have added value, is our attention to the how as well as the what, if that makes sense. So it goes back to context. We've talked about it. Like, it's not just about having a great idea that's been evidenced and it works. It's about understanding and the application and the value of that particular thing in practice for a particular health and care system.
Yeah, okay. You mentioned the V word there a couple of times, John, value. It's something that we're always being asked about at the moment. Is how is the perception of value changing, or how is the NHS, how is health and social care looking at things differently value-wise? Have you got any thoughts or comments around kind of that value piece and what that means in the integrated world?
It's well, I guess my thoughts are, I'm hopeful that we're going in the right direction. I think, so from the discussions I have with our colleagues working to develop new integrated care systems across the area where we work, is a real sense of wanting to think about value for the population and think about that for the long term. And I'm really hopeful that the bringing together of integrated care systems give us a chance to think about value across a whole pathway, not just within a particular element of a pathway, which is often where you can get stuck in a slightly challenging position as an innovator trying to bring a particular product to market that delivers end-to-end value, but you're only talking to one bit of that value chain, so therefore it's quite hard to demonstrate that you value to them. So there's that opportunity for that, but there's also an opportunity to think about value over a longer time period as well, as we start to see our whole system responsible for population health rather than particular clinical areas at a particular point in time. In the way that we operate. So I guess I'd start by saying I'm hopeful that we're going in the right direction. I think the reality of probably what most of the people that you work with is they're not experiencing a significant change yet. And therefore I think it's really about working with those that understand the nature of the specific system that you're trying to work with to see what value means to them, because it kind of can depend on the nature of the context in which you're trying to implement or introduce something new too. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is I think value is context specific to some extent. So really understanding that when you're working with the different parts of the health and care system. I hope integrated care systems give a kind of larger geography in which to have those conversations. They give a more integrated way of thinking about value and perhaps a longer term perception of value as well. But I think the role that AHSNs are trying to play then is really based on many years experience working in those places with particular parts of the system, so that we really understand what the context of that particular proposition in this health system might really look like in practice. So that for me is why I think the role AHSNs play is important. It's about understanding the context, as well as just, I think it can be perceived that it's about making connections and making introductions, and of course, you know, that's part of it. We build a knowledge of a place and a network, and then we're trying to connect a commercial network into that to be able to bring great new products to market that will benefit patients and benefit the system. But it's deeper, as it gets another level deeper than that, of saying, okay, but specifically in this place, in the context of working with Plymouth or working in Truro or working in Penzance, what will it really mean to implement that change in primary care in that particular primary care network, for example? So you're starting to get much more specific and deeper. And I think therein lies the real challenge I would expect from the sorts of innovators that we talk to is, you know, that's time consuming and complex to understand. And that's a big part, I think, of what we're trying to do through our work in AHSNs is demystify some of that and have that knowledge already so we can bring that to bear with the great ideas that have the potential to have value for the systems that we work in. So I've talked around the subject a bit there, probably, Tom, without answering a specific question, but you know, I don't think anyone has the answer to that stuff. It is really context specific still.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the most important takeaway from what you've said, that I think often people are looking for sort of that silver bullet of here's the answer, and this is, you know, this is going to resonate with everyone. But, you know, I think that context specific as a phrase is really valuable. One thing that's just cropped up that we haven't addressed, I was just wondering in terms of how you're measured, because you've talked about short-term and longer-term value. So in terms of the work that you do, are you looking at in-year value, or are you looking at longer term, or is it a bit of a blend?
So is a question about how, as AHSNs, is our value measured? Or,
yeah,
or what are we looking for?
Your return on investment, as it were. So you're funded with national programs and you do regional stuff. Are people looking for you to have an immediate impact or not?
Well, like anyone working in and around healthcare, we need to have our eyes on kind of different ends of the spectrum of value. So absolutely, we need to have a portfolio of work that's delivering short to medium term value back to the health and care system, because if we're not, we're going to struggle to really show the benefit of what we do in the reality of the system that we work in. So what you see through a lot of our national programs that we work on is they're built on an existing evidence base where something's been tested, developed, it's been shown its value, it's typically got health economic value demonstrated through those sorts of trials and tests, so that then when we're looking at extrapolating that to adopting at a national scale, we're confident that there is a value proposition to the commissioners that we work with, that if we do this thing at scale, it's going to have a benefit for the work we do. And I mentioned some of the, you know, the high level stats. We've got some great impact reports from a national level as well that try and bring out the way in which we think about value. I guess the broad metric for us is largely about, given that we're working with things that are evidence that we know have value once they're implemented, a large part of our national program is about getting stuff implemented and making sure it's adopted at scale. Increasingly, we're then trying to make sure that the assumptions we've made about the value are then validated in practice when we do that as well. So there's an evaluation element to that, but the assumption being that if you're taking something that's well evidenced and proven, then if you're doing it everywhere, that's got to be a good thing, because you're just scaling up the thing that had the value at a smaller scale. But we do look to test those assumptions as we go through. So adoption rates, I guess, is the key area of value of the things that we're working on. We're also then commissioned in terms of value around the nature of the benefit we achieve from the economic side of the equation as well. So that's partly in the way that we scale up national programs and delivering a scale of growth of particular types of innovations, but it's also in the way that we support companies earlier on in that value chain, or in that, I guess, development of their product or particular service, to test, validate, prove, scale, and develop. And I talked about some of that investment leverage that we've achieved through our partnerships that we build in brokering those relationships between commercial businesses and the NHS to test out particular things in practice, demonstrate the validity of them, enabling them to then raise investment, enabling them to then get to a larger scale as well. So that have a range of economic measures that look at the way in which we bring value to the life science system as well. So that's the dual, but it goes back to the dual purpose of what AHSNs are for, is the population health benefit and the economic growth piece. And we think about the measures of those obviously in different ways. The final thing I'd say is, like, for us in the Southwest, what we're then trying to lay, I guess, over the top of that is to say, okay, if we're going to have a real focus on health equity, and we're going to focus on some really specific gaps. Our job is going to be about demonstrating the impact against those specific health equity gaps through the work that we do. So that's getting into more of an outcome-based measure, whereas our national work is often about an output-based measure, because we're pretty sure the outcome's going to work. When we're at an earlier stage of testing and development, actually we have to be really clear on, is the outcome going to happen through the work that we're doing, or is it happening? And if it is, why is it happening? So it comes back to like the how bit of me I've talked about earlier on. And so that's probably the dimensions I'd think about, is the scale of adoption as a national network, the way in which we're contributing to economic growth through our interactions with the health and life science system, and then finally the way in which we're building an evidence base of impact for future potential national programs and for the impact we have in our region as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much. We've just got a couple of minutes left. So obviously you're sort of starting out on your journey in terms of your strategy, but in terms of how you'd like to see the AHSN evolve, so yours and the network more widely, I suppose, have you got a vision for how you think it can evolve, roles that it might play in the future, whether the sorts of things that you might turn your hand to? Yeah,
well, I guess at a national level, we have a shared vision of what we're trying to do as a network of 15 AHSNs. And that, in simple, is to do what we do, better and at a larger scale, and to keep getting better at what we do, but to do that at a larger scale. So we've set a very clear ambition as a network of AHSNs that we want to increase the scale of our impact by increasing the scale of the activity around adoption and spread of innovation, and doing that through building new commissioning partnerships, new partnerships with parts of our health and care system and with industry and others, to take what we've learned about how you adopt and spread innovation and take that to a larger scale. So we think we can do more of what we do nationally together. And then locally, the way in which we're trying to build our particular contribution to that national vision is through building a depth of knowledge and impact around health equity and the specific challenges that we're working on as well. So if we step forward a few years, I guess the vision of what we're trying to create here is a deep impact and reputation and knowledge around tackling health equity through innovation, and using that then to contribute to the work we do as a national network to try and have a larger impact at a larger scale through the adoption and spread of innovation, tackling a whole range of different types of health and care challenges as well. So yeah, I'm very feel very much a sense of a contribution to a national vision, but with a real sense of I guess a particular focus that we're trying to bring to the contribution we make to that as well. Yeah, fantastic. I think you've really nicely sort of captured the different elements of the AHSN's role, and I think a really strong message coming through there is how important the local insight, the local intelligence is, and that's a big takeaway, I'm sure, for our audience, that never has it been more important, and the role that you're playing is going to be a huge facilitator in helping people to get that depth of understanding of where their technologies, their innovations might play a role, and help them to gain traction. So thank you very much indeed, Jon. Yeah, I appreciate it. It was a bit of a rush for you to get here, but I've really enjoyed our conversation, and you can go and have a cup of tea and clear your head in a second. Thank you everyone for listening in at home or wherever you are. We're obviously still learning huge amounts every time we speak to people as the NHS accelerates through integration. So if you want to keep up to speed with what we're learning as we sort of try and stay a step ahead, you can follow our NHS Whispers page on LinkedIn, sign up to our newsletter via NHS Insights at mtechaccess.co.uk, or have a look at our website for all the other things that we do. So Jon, thanks again. We'll be back at the end of September talking more around the evolution of value, the interaction between medicines and non-pharmacological treatments, and yeah, everything else that goes with those areas. So thanks again, look after yourselves, and see you next time.